Welcome, everybody, to And Security for All. I am Jonathan Kimmitt. I am here. I'm guest hosting today. I'm really excited for our interview guest. Wasn't able to make it, so she asked if I could take her place on this one, and I jumped at the chance. I was really excited about meeting Dr. Ilia Kolochenko. I knew I was going to mess up his name, and I apologize for that. Um, Hopefully, this is a great topic. This is specifically talking about law enforcement and hacking into systems and or getting data from systems, whether it be cloud services, whether it be devices, whether it be services that we provide. So I think it's going to be a really great topic today. You can find us at any of the Voice America online websites. So make sure you check us out for any past episodes. You can also find us on your favorite podcast venues. And if you have any questions for us, please make sure you post them. I know that this is going to be a pre-recorded session, but we're happy to reach back out afterward and answer any questions that you may have. So I would like to invite our guest today, Dr. Ilia Kolochenko. He is founder of ImmuniWeb. I wasn't quite prepared to say that. I saw it and I was about to read it. I'm going to have him introduce himself. He's got a huge background and experience. Does some great things, and I believe I saw on the on LinkedIn you've been awarded CEO of the Year by Cybersecurity Excellence Awards in 2023. So, Dr. Kolochenko, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Good morning, good afternoon, Jonathan. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. Probably as a very brief introduction, my name is Ilia. I'm the chief architect and founder of ImmuniWeb. We are a global application security company headquartered in Geneva, but we're serving enterprise customers in more than 50 countries. And briefly about myself, I've been in cybersecurity for more than 15 years, mostly practicing in penetration testing, digital forensics. So any tech questions are more than welcome. We'll probably be talking about different privacy and cybersecurity legislation this uh, on this call today. Important disclaimer from my side, it will not be a legal advice. So if you're looking for a legal advice, please talk to your lawyer. Here it's just, private friendly discussion that we'll try to make as fun as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do the same thing. I always recommend that people go and talk to the general counsel. Number one, to find out those specific things. But number two, go build those relationships with your general counsel, your external counsel, because when you have a friend in those offices, it makes a huge difference in us being able to do our jobs. So let me ask you, Ilia, if you've got a huge variety of background. I was checking out your bio up on LinkedIn and a few other places. I mean, you've got background in law in the United States. You've got a background in law in terms of several different countries. Kind of give us a background on that. What's your education background? You've got a lot of stuff here. Again, from the U.S., you've got stuff I think from Scotland, and there are a few others. So, kind of give us that background there.
To cut the long story short, I'm currently pursuing my fourth master degree in law at George Mason University in the United States. My first bachelor degree was actually in computer science. So I've been doing most of the technical things, but like about 8 years ago, I understood that we would probably have a lot of synergy between legislation and cybersecurity. And actually, this is exactly what we are observing today, that many industries are becoming heavily regulated in terms of cybersecurity, data protection, privacy, reporting and disclosure of data, which is different type of incidents. So I really enjoy doing my own research, how we can help our customers and our partners, not just to protect their systems, but also to ensure that they actually comply with the applicable law and many different regulations, because doing business in one country and saying we don't care about any foreign laws is not a best practice anymore in 2023. So even if you say that, listen, we have 90% of our customers based in New York or Illinois, and we don't care about European Union and their legislation, it may be a risky practice. I'm not saying that this is like dangerous per se, because if you have no presence whatsoever in foreign countries, it may be fine. But I would say in 2023, it will be hard to find even a medium-sized company that has no clients abroad. And many countries, they've recently enacted fairly tough legislation saying, even if you have one single customer from our country, if you're handling any personal data, financial data from our country, from our land, from our citizens, from our residents, you must comply with our legislation as well. And we see that now penalties for non-compliance are becoming really harsh. And we recently observed that non-compliance with law can trigger criminal penalties for CISOs. So I would probably say that in 2023, we'll see even more security incidents that will trigger severe consequences for C-level executives. And I would say this is why I enjoy studying both cybersecurity and cyber law.
Absolutely. And I would say that it also includes any decision makers you have in the organization. So it might even go down, not only the C level, but system administrators or, network infrastructure people or anybody that may have access to systems or make decisions on systems that contains data of individuals could be wrapped up. A lot of the privacy laws that we're seeing, it does have that, those qualifications in there that you will protect that data. And if someone makes the decision to do something that may reduce the security or reduce the privacy, they could be held individually accountable for that. There's a lot of pieces out there for that. So I think it's, we have I know we have a wide variety of audience members. We have everything from C-level and executive leadership all the way down to individual technicians. And I want to make sure that they understand that, as a community, as an industry, we all have those responsibilities to maintain the privacy and security of the data that we have. And it's not just the data. We have a lot of systems that may have some sort of confidential data, but we also have life safety systems, systems that, whether it be in hospitals or card access systems, HVAC systems, anything like that, that may otherwise have a negative effect on someone. Those individuals could be held responsible for the decisions they make. So absolutely. Let me ask you, you've been doing this a long time. You have a wide variety of experiences. What have you seen in the last, let's say, 10 years of been the change of, 15, 20 years ago, this idea of CISOs kind of came around and really became really popular in organizations. And I would say probably that 10 years ago, the idea of that privacy officer or the DPO started, emerging as someone as priority in an organization in terms of making decisions. What have you seen in the last, say, 10 years that in terms of the changes of security and privacy that you really want to highlight?
So that's a great question, and probably I will have a long answer, but let me start from the beginning. I would say that I definitely observe a lot of attention, that we pay now to privacy and data protection, and I believe that this is a very good trend, because I would argue that properly implemented privacy controls, they are beneficial for business owners. For example, if you don't store necessary personal data, you will have less data stolen if you have a data breach. Okay. When you implement holistic controls and audits in your company to control who can access personal data of your customers, you will significantly reduce, data by insiders. So likewise, if you have a comprehensive program to handle, to process, to store, and to securely delete your data, you'll have no problems to comply with different requests you may be receiving from your customers. For example, right to be forgotten. Okay, you will also have clear visibility where actually your data is stored. Potentially reducing the challenge and the problem of shadow IT and countless third-party managed systems. Right. So I believe that a properly implemented and managed privacy protection program can bring a lot of value to the company and actually prevent or at least significantly reduce many kind of preventable data breaches. Then I would also say that on the other hand, we have a lot of confusion because we see that many countries are actively legislating on different interconnected topics, from AI to IoT security, and that's definitely, I would say, socially desirable trend. But when you have a new law being introduced every week in a jurisdiction where you actually do business, things become ungovernable and unmanageable. So I believe that governments should perhaps consider more consolidation and conformity, because when they are actively enacting new laws, they actually making compliance a very heavy burden. And I believe that if the trend of over regulation persists, we'll see many businesses of all sizes, that will eventually say, listen, it's so expensive, time consuming, and burdensome to comply with this, complex, stack of laws and regulations that we prefer to pay fines, than to complying with everything, because it's just a nightmare. So I would say that privacy, data protection is definitely good. However, we shall be prudent not to fall into this, spiral of over regulation where compliance doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, one of the things that is interesting is when we look at technology, um, technology progresses really quickly. And the new technologies, new systems, new services that are out there, they come in very quickly. Laws, regulations, that takes time. That takes time of getting passed, getting understood, and getting passed. So when we look at AI, this is one of the things. And I would love to talk with you at some point in the future, maybe another show, about the whole idea of AI and as it relates to automated processing with things like GDPR or some of the other privacy regulations. Because when you start putting in AI, that self-contained processing that AI does, how does that meet the definition of automated processing? So anyway, that's something that I would love to ask you about in the future, maybe on another show. But it is really interesting because, as yeah, here in the United States, we are looking at privacy laws that are very secretarial around the different industries, with higher education, healthcare, finance. A lot of state laws are coming into place for privacy, where the industry is kind of hoping that there is a GDPR-like law that comes out under the federal regulations. So those sorts of things are happening, but we're still growing in that. We're still learning in that, and with that comes a lot of confusion, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of technology, and a lot of enforcement that needs to be put into place before we can actually have those things effective in the United States. And I think that this kind of happening that way across the world is countries are implementing the privacy laws or implementing the privacy concepts of transparency, right to be forgotten, things like that. they may not necessarily know how to implement that fully with all of their systems. And the individual decision makers in the organization certainly don't know how to implement that. And I think that really leads into the question of the show is when we're talking about law enforcement, criminal investigations, um, the idea of privacy to an extent, and actually from a technical point of view, I implement protections on systems that I manage, for organizations that actually makes, in some cases, criminal investigations harder. Because I want to encrypt devices. I want to make sure that they're not allowed to be gotten in access of someone who's a malicious actor or whatever. But that is very specifically affecting how law enforcement may be able to get access to that device. So just from a broad point of view, what's your thoughts on privacy versus that law enforcement access to data?
So that's that's a very hot topic in 2023, and I think it will become even hotter in the upcoming weeks, months, and years, because on one side we need to enable our law enforcement agencies to investigate serious crime efficiently, rapidly, and effectively. On the other side, we need to ensure conformity with due process, constitutional rights, privacy protection, because I don't think that anyone will be excited to know that his or her local sheriff can easily access, his or her Facebook account. Just thinking about preventing potential crime in the county, right? On the other
Right.
hand, I don't think that anyone will be happy to learn that dangerous terrorists cannot be apprehended and will continue their nefarious activities because law enforcement are precluded from hacking into their cell phones or computers, and that they are abusing and exploiting privacy protection regime, saying, no, you can't seize this and we'll not give you our passwords. So we really need to find a fair balance, okay? And actually, I spent 4 amazing years at Capital Technology University researching on this stack of topics where we talk about, criminal investigation, privacy, law enforcement duties, and rights to conduct lawful hacking in order to get, some important evidence when investigating serious crime. And it was my doctoral research on this topic. So we have to consider many interconnected topics. For example, when we have an innocent third party that is accidentally or tangentially impacted by a law enforcement investigation, for example, you have your website, being a small company, you have a website hosted in the cloud, and law enforcement officers accidentally disrupted for half an hour while investigating, some serious crime activities, renting the very same cloud and somehow, disrupting your small website. Do they need to notify you about this? Because on one side, it can appear to be like self-evident that if law enforcement cause some even small, intangible damage, they should be accountable. But on the other side, you never know whether the person who suffers, even a very small harm, that he or she will not start an active campaign on Facebook saying, listen, feds hacked into my cloud and they actually disrupted my e-commerce website for 30 minutes, and this is anti-constitutional and illegal. So we have a lot of complex questions. Or, for example, when we are dealing with cloud servers or cloud systems or managed systems residing in the cloud, this is a very complex matter in terms of jurisdiction, because you may have servers physically hosted in the United States, but the company operating them may be incorporated in the UK. The managing company that is actually doing IT support and technical stuff can be incorporated in Switzerland, for example. So every time law enforcement officers are knocking to a door saying we need the data and we have a court order, they will say, oh, listen, it's actually not our company that is responsible for sharing the data. Please talk to another company. So it is becoming a really complex and inefficient and time-consuming process. Like a decade ago, it was kind of operational, but in 2023, not anymore. And I would say what we are observing at ImmuniWeb, because we do a lot of interesting things like dark web monitoring, and we observe that actually now the traditional notion of dark web doesn't exist anymore. And when you are really dealing with organized cyber crime groups, they're trying to hide their online platforms, marketplaces, chats, however we call them. And frequently they're just lawfully renting space at AWS,
Sure.
GCP, Microsoft Azure. They leverage the full power of encryption, and nobody is actually suspecting that they are buying and selling terabytes of stolen data in a public cloud environment. And it's becoming really challenging to investigate such type of crimes, because they do not advertise their presence. We of course have I'd say maybe several hundreds of well-known hacking forums, marketplaces where you can purchase stolen data from ransomware gangs. But I would say the most interesting stuff is actually happening, behind the stores. And people who are selling or buying data there, they are not looking for any advertising. They are not looking for external parties. And the question is how to investigate all this. Same is applicable now to traditional crime, because I would argue that cyber crime investigation perhaps is an isolated topic, and you have many of subtleties in relation to investigation of cyber crime specifically. But traditional crime, traditional organized crime like drug trafficking, human trafficking, is also shifting to internet. And they also using the power of readily available strong strong encryption enabled by default and by design, and actually without compromising their devices, just by seizing logs, backups, evidence, you'll not get anything. So law enforcement agencies really need to have fairly flexible power to penetrate remotely and stealthy into devices of suspected criminals. We obviously talk about serious crime only, okay? But without providing our law enforcement agencies with a lawful power to hack, we'll probably end up being, unable to investigate like 90% of crimes, and this may become a very undesirable situation for our society.
Yeah, we see that. I see that here. My previous employment, with a university, we would submit things to local law enforcement, and the moment it was on a server outside the state or even outside the country, they were basically like, "Well, we can't do anything. There's nothing here for us to investigate." So I mean, it is certainly a problem. I guess a question on that. Well, my first question is, let's talk about attribution. That's one of the things, when in the cybersecurity realm, we talk about hack back. and I know it's slightly different than talking about the law enforcement side, but we talk about this idea of hacking back. If someone is hacking you, do you have the right to hack back? And the question, I always try to get the question over to not whether or not hacking back is legal or not, because that's a different issue, but how can you provide true attribution that that computer may have been attacking you, or that may have been the one they were using, or it could have been a pivot point, or a redirect, or a variety of things. So kind of what are your thoughts about attribution of, if law enforcement sees a device, sees an account, sees a web service, whatever it may be, what do you think the process of attribution needs to be to ensure that they're going after the correct website, the correct server, correct service, which will hopefully otherwise get them to the actual criminal?
That's actually a very complicated question, and perhaps you need to shed some light on different aspects. Um, we observe that now criminals start actively using different anti-forensic tools. For example, you have ready to use tools that will purposely inject into your machine millions of artifacts. Okay, for example, different logs evidencing that you've been browsing websites with child pornography, different traces of illicit payments, presence on thousands of dark web forums selling, buying drugs, and so on. The idea is simple, that once law enforcement officers get your device into their forensic lab, they will probably say that this person managed to sell, as many drugs as the entire cartel of Pablo Escobar. So when you come with 1 million crimes, against one person, probably the judge will ask you to leave the court, right? So we see that
Sure.
criminals are becoming perfidiously smart. They are purposely, flooding their devices, with fake logs. So actually, it's very difficult to understand, which transaction out of 10 million, online transactions is a real one. So attribution is becoming challenging.
Yeah.
Then same, when you are investigating remote intrusions, that's probably a slightly different topic, but I would say attribution in cybercrime is a time-consuming and resource-consuming process, because, for example, what we observe on the dark web, that we have several cybercrime gangs that are purposely selling access to compromised networks and devices of law enforcement agencies. Frequently, it will be nothing really interesting, like small county sheriff's computer, but they sell it to be eventually used as proxies, because afterwards, for example, if you're dealing with I'd say a financial company that may be doing some nasty things to their customers, and their cybersecurity folks detect an intrusion, but they say, well, listen, we've been hacked, but apparently this is our state police. So maybe we are being investigated, and we shall not report this incident. We shall not do anything, So attribution is becoming a very complex task, and I think that we'll see more and more incidents where different governmental agencies, including law enforcement agencies, are purposely compromised in order to be used as proxies. Because when you say that law enforcement agency is hacking your network, you'll probably think twice before hacking back, investigating, complaining, or taking
Right.
legal action.
Right. Absolutely. Interesting thing is, CISA over here in the United States, they have a new A new process called Circia. I think that's how you say it. But it's basically if you had a cyber event that you need to report it to CISO within a certain time frame. And the idea is simple. I mean, I believe it is. It's there needs to be an understanding of what kind of events are happening, in critical infrastructure areas, so that we can kind of get at least a broad view of how many ransomware attacks, how many of these, how many of these, how many of these. Because right now there is no requirement unless you have a specific compliance that you have to meet. There is no requirement to report some of that stuff. But if we don't know how big the issue is, we don't really understand kind of the controls we need to implement. However, I think you're absolutely right. When we start talking about, um, it's an arms race. And when we kind of know this from a cybersecurity perspective, as we implement one control or one requirement, then the attackers, the malicious individuals are going to go, okay, well, we're just going to change the process in this. And I could definitely see them, you know, you may only have one compromised machine in that sheriff's network, but now they have to report it. Now you have to investigate it. Now it starts engaging these resources over and over again. That's going to tie up a lot of the processes in which, let's say organizations that have limited resources, they may not be able to investigate it. But the idea from the attacker's point of view could be kind of an internal denial of service attack by just saying, hey, thunk, we touched your machine. Now you have to go report it. Now you have to start the investigation. Now you have to engage your cyber insurance. Now you have to do this. That's going to be painful for them. So I could see it very quickly that, kind of outside of the attribution question, just the fact that that is an available attack to tie up resources could be something the attackers begin using just as part of their process to cover their tracks doing something else.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about encryption. We talked about this a little bit before the show, but this is a major issue. I know that a few years ago we had the issue of the FBI was trying to get access to an iPhone, and they reached out to Apple and asked to get access to the iPhone. They did a lot of these different things. And that's actually something that we talk about in the industry, such as, when you have a device, if you use a PIN code or a passcode as opposed to your fingerprint or Face ID, there are some requirements and non-requirements of whether or not law enforcement can make you unlock that phone, with something like a PIN code. But that really does come into, I tell organizations to make sure all of their devices are encrypted and to make sure that they're using a passcode and make sure that there's a requirement for the containers for organizational data, even on bring your own devices. But those sorts of things, that has absolutely a direct effect on law enforcement's ability to get data off of that phone. What's your thoughts on that? What is the kind of the compromise there, or kind of what is the how should we be moving forward with the ability of allowing law enforcement to be able to do the job we need them to do to keep us safe versus implementing security controls on devices to protect the data that's on those devices?
So I'd probably say that we certainly need encryption, and we certainly need to preserve integrity of encryption, because since decades, we had every year probably we had suggestions calling to regulate encryption and to implement mandatory backdoors that would be accessible to law enforcement agencies. I believe that this is a very bad idea, because sooner or later, these backdoors will be compromised by cyber threat actors, and our economy, our state secrets, everything will be compromised. So I believe that introducing mandatory backdooring is a very bad idea. And with that being said, unfortunately, we arrived to a kind of point of no return, because today, if you have an up-to-date iPhone with the most recent software, most recent hardware, and you follow all the best practices, basically for law enforcement agencies, it's a brick. Okay, I'm not talking about some very high-profile agencies that have zero-day exploits for the most recent firmware, but most state agencies will not be able to do anything with your iPhone, for example. Unless in the next few months or year there will be an exploitable vulnerability, but it may be far too late. So my idea and my vision is that law enforcement agencies should be specifically authorized to perform lawful hacking because, for example, instead of trying to decrypt someone's iPhone, they may try to compromise remote systems. Okay. Of course, when we are dealing with organized crime, they will probably not be using WhatsApp. Okay, they will highly likely have their own encrypted ecosystem, their own servers, and this is something that law enforcement may wish to compromise, to take control in order to understand what the bad guys are talking about, what they're planning, and so on. We may also consider several, I would say, alternatives. For example, several European countries, they have a separate criminal offense that is punishable by a fairly small penalty, I guess, up to 3 years in prison when you refuse to give your password to a law enforcement agency from your iPhone, from your tablet, from your laptop. The problem is that serious crime, they will certainly prefer, I mean, members of organized crime, they will certainly prefer, to spend 3 years in jail saying, okay, I'll take a break, than giving a password and eventually end up spending next 30 years in jail. So I believe that mandatory disclosure, is not something that may bring a lot of results because it can be, misused against innocent citizens and when prosecuting fairly insignificant crimes and incidents. But against organized crime, I don't think that members of gangs will be impressed by 1, 2, or 3 year prison sentence, and they will prefer to keep the password confidential, spend some time behind the bars, and that's it. So I think lawful hacking by law enforcement agencies, including interception by hacking, okay, including backdooring of the devices from remote, okay, this is the most I would say, efficient option to ensure that on one side we protect encryption, we make sure that encryption is being used for good. But on the other side, when threat actors and the organized crime is abusing encryption to hide, to conceal their criminal activities, law enforcement will be able to get hands on their data by using lawful hacking techniques.
Yeah, and that's it kind of comes back to the attribution question. How do we know that those devices really are the individuals? And I think that's one of the questions that come up. Let me ask you, from a point of view of a law enforcement officer who wants to do that, or an agency, let's kind of keep it broader, but an agency who wants to do that. What do you think? Do we have the approval processes right now, or what do you think the approval process should be in terms of having a court order, a judge's permission, grand jury, that sort of thing? What do you think that permission to be able to do that sort of hacking back would look like, moving into the future?
So I would say that depending on the jurisdiction, legislation may be very different. We have some countries where no court order is required at all. We also have countries where you must get a court order, and it may take up to a few days. Okay, so I would argue that public prosecutor office shall have the authority to grant the permission to break into remote systems, and this order need to be subsequently validated by a court. And for example, if later on, because we frequently deal with emergencies where it's Saturday evening and you will unlikely get a court order in a timely manner, and you need to hack into remote system right now, right here, to save someone's life. Okay. But you cannot do this because you need a court order and it will take at least several hours and so on. So I guess that if we have a public prosecutor in charge of the case, he or she gives a green light, that's perfectly enough. Just to make sure to avoid kind of unbridled hacking by law enforcement, where everyone will be hacked, including for speeding offenses on the highway, to ensure that lawful hacking by law enforcement agencies remains under control and is subject to independent audit and judicial oversight. We need to have this order of a public prosecutor to be ratified later on by a judge. Okay. It can take 1 week or 2 weeks. It doesn't really matter, because afterwards, if the court says that no, this order to break into a remote system violates constitutional rights, violates applicable law, whatsoever else, you may simply have a provision saying all the data, all the evidence, all the intelligence obtained during this operation that has not been validated and ratified must be securely deleted and must not be used against the suspect. Okay, so I believe that we don't need to create a necessary high standard that only upon a court order you can break into a remote system, because it will merely make the process inefficient and slow. But we obviously need a judicial oversight to make sure that we will not have arbitrary hacking by law enforcement.
Right, absolutely. And I guess the next natural question is, because we talked about it earlier about having, it may be coming from, you know, anywhere, maybe come from any machine on the internet, which is, any country, any network in the world. What about when it comes to that remote system is behind it's at a jurisdiction that is not controlled by that law enforcement agency. So it's in a different country or in a different network that is otherwise well beyond your regular access. What is that enforcement and or jurisdictional issue with doing those sorts of things?
This is a very complex question because, for example, what happens when, for example, U.S. law enforcement agency is breaking into a European company that is providing, I don't know, hosting and infrastructure to an organized crime group? This is a very complex question, both in terms of, legal consequences it may have locally in the European country in question, as well as a lot of problems in terms of international law, because you cannot just do whatever you want in a foreign jurisdiction. It will likely be a violation of international law. And we also have many legal scholars who argue that cyber operations is actually a very subtle topic, because sometimes when you have, for example, a criminal gang operating from France, for example, and have their presence and their infrastructure in France, and they're physically located in France, and many of their victims are also located in France. In this case, for example, a British law enforcement agency must certainly collaborate with their French colleagues in order to perform any hacking and any offensive cyber, let's say, operations without permission from French authorities will be a violation of international law. However, on the other side, if American criminals are just renting, cloud space of an American company, but the data center in question is physically located in France, okay, it shall not be, a violation of international law when U.S. law enforcement agencies are breaking into remote server that actually physically hosted in France, but French government, French state has absolutely no interest to prosecute or to investigate this crime because it has no relation whatsoever with the country. And the only nexus is that American criminals are hosting their data in France, but actually everything is owned and operated by an American company. In this case, it shall be permitted, but I would say as of today, there is no clear-cut answer to the question of how to organize offensive operations while investigating and prosecuting serious crime on the internet. I would probably say the best option that is unfortunately not always accessible is to collaborate with a foreign country, but this is possible, for example, between states like Australia, UK, maybe some European countries. But if you are trying to go in a far away foreign jurisdictions, they may just be super slow. I'm not even talking about, hostile jurisdictions that will purposely refuse any collaboration with the US, right? I'm just talking about small countries, developing countries that simply cannot, invest into their cyber law enforcement agencies that have a very small units dedicated to managing, offensive operations in their cyberspace. So sometimes, collaboration is a real challenge, and unfortunately, I don't see a simple solution because we do have Budapest Convention. It has been here for many years, but still, many countries, parties to the convention, they still haven't implemented all the provisions, or they have implemented them, but in a peculiar, way. And we also have some states that disagree over certain provisions, how to collaborate, how to implement certain processes internally in their home countries. So now we're also talking about a global treaty on prosecution of cybercrime. Unfortunately, I don't think that it will provide a sustainable solution because, especially in 2023, I would say the year of political, economic, financial turbulence, unless all countries, all states, agree to collaborate and will agree on terms that will make sense for everyone, no convention, no treaty will bring solutions. So maybe some states will eventually take a, say, reasonable decision to ignore certain provisions of international law when so is really required to protect their national security and to prosecute serious and organized crime.
Yeah, that's you're absolutely right. I mean, it's getting that global cooperation is going to be really, really difficult. Just as you said, political issues, economic issues, things like that. one of the questions that comes up, I've been in debates on this and conferences, the industry talks about it, and that is right now, fundamentally, we don't have law enforcement across the world that is dedicated to that cyber realm, whatever that means, that the idea of international access to networks, when somebody is violating someone's law in one country, but they're sitting in fact, in some of my presentations, I talk about how there are organized crime organizations that is an 8 to 5 job, that their job is to attack outside countries. It's not illegal in their country to do that as long as they're not attacking their own country. They can do that. They have benefits, they have pay. It's an 8 to 5 job. But we don't really have, on an international scale, on a worldwide scale, anybody to do enforcement on this concept that we have of the internet or of the cyber world. I guess I'm not asking the question right. It kind of comes back to that jurisdiction, but really it's more than that. Is, do you think that the world or the internet should have an internet law enforcement? I guess that's really kind of the fundamental question, regardless of what you call it and what you say, but have that law enforcement whose role is, things that happen on the internet, on networks that cross borders, that cross international jurisdictions, that cross maybe Interpol on a cyber level or something like that. What's your thoughts on that? I know that's kind of reaching out there, but what's your thoughts?
I think we should, and actually, it's an excellent point. However, unfortunately, I don't think that this is something that we will be able to create within the next 10 years. Okay, because in order to create such an intergovernmental body, that will be that will be investigating and prosecuting cyber crime, or let's say traditional crime that is abusing the benefits of the internet, we will need all states around the globe to agree on collaboration, on transparency. And I don't think that in 2023 that this is a viable option. So I would perhaps just say that I've been always, advocating for providing additional support to law enforcement agencies, because we see amazing efforts that are undertaken by Europol and Interpol to coordinate, different operations against different underground networks implicated into child abuse, drug trafficking, and different types of organized crime. But they do not have sufficient funding, as well as local law enforcement units dedicated to digital forensic or prosecution of cybercrime. So I've been always advocating that governments certainly need to prioritize, giving more budgets to law enforcement agencies, national and international ones, because otherwise, cyber law enforcement becomes virtually impossible, because when you have cybersecurity companies that can offer a digital forensic experts, a triple salary compared to what he or she can get in a state law enforcement agency, of course, it will be almost impossible to hire talented experts. And also, we should bear in mind that we need to have cyber law experts. We need to have diplomats. We need to have many professionals, not just techies, but also we need to have, for example, lawyers who will be able to give a green light, or at least to say that this is kind of okay, even if it's not something that is clearly permitted under the law, and may have some consequences under the international law. For example, in this case, we can move forward. So we definitely need more funding for law enforcement. agencies that fight against cybercrime on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting close on time. I think we're about 2 minutes or so to the end of the show, but I wanted to ask you, my big thing is helping people grow in their skill sets and learn, all, as much as they can about the topics that interest them, and especially in cybersecurity and privacy. But thinking about this in the future, maybe 10 years in the future, if someone came to you and says, hey, this really fascinates me, what do I need to study now to be that resource in 10 years from now? What would your recommendation be? So what kinds of things should people be studying right now, thinking 10 years in the future about this stuff?
I would probably say that people should consider having several sets of skills, because I don't think that just being a programmer or cybersecurity expert will suffice in the next 10 years. So if you can have, for example, a degree in law and the cybersecurity degree, you will be extremely valuable and demanded person, because I guess we'll see increasing synergy of cyber law, cybersecurity investigations. So try to be diversified in terms of your skills. So if you would like to study cybersecurity, that's great, and you should definitely do so. But consider taking some classes dedicated to cyber law, to data protection law, because this will certainly be a huge added value for your employer, for your future employment. So combining different areas of skill set, I think, is a key for your success.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Dr. Kolochenko, thank you so much for coming by and talking with us about this topic. This is a great topic. I want to remind everyone that And Security for All can be found on the website and your favorite podcast tools. So please join us every week, and we will be coming back next week with another great topic, another great speaker. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.